Hi Mike, it's Chris Harrington, Jenny Palmer's brother-in-law. Is Colleen available? I didn't hear the click as Mike disconnected the call because of my wife Mary's yelling and "No, dear. I'm sorry to say that I'm unable to let you in at the moment. I've been waiting for 2 minutes and I've even redialed Mike on Colin's home phone. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to stop pounding on my door. I'm sure you didn't mean any harm, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to understand 2 things. I don't care if you call the cops, but I would really appreciate it if you could leave. I'm going to have a chat with your wife, and there's not much you can do to stop me. Have a good night." This time I had the satisfaction of hanging up on him despite the continued banging on the door. I leaned back in my office chair, closed my eyes, and tried to make the last important decision of a long roller coaster day. Should I call my sister? In-law's husband. I met my wife, Mary, in high school. I was a junior and was sitting in the bleachers with my buddies waiting for the start of a Friday night football game. There was a similarly sized group of girls from the sophomore class sitting in front of us. As the game progressed, we took turns going to the concession stand. When it was my turn to go, I found that a cute blonde named Mary came with me. We carried hot dogs, French fries, and sodas back, and guess what? Mary and I ended up sitting together. She was pretty smart, had a good sense of humor, and best of all, she didn't have a boyfriend during the middle of the third quarter. Someone shouted, "Are we going to McDonald's after the game?" There was near unanimous agreement that the girls and guys in our group would continue to have fun at the nearby McDonald's. The franchise decided to take a chance. I turned to Mary and asked, "I'd rather have a pizza than greasy fries. Would you like to go to Tony's Pizza?" I was over the moon when she agreed. Mary and I dated once a weekend for a couple of weeks and it was so much fun. After 2 months of dating, we committed to go steady and things only got better. Mary was my date to the junior prom, and I was walking on. I was in heaven as I escorted the most beautiful girl in our school to the dance. I was so happy. But then, 2 weeks later, on the Monday leading up to the senior prom, I was jogging to the tennis courts for team practice. I was jogging with my neighbor Julie Burke. Julie was on the girls' team. I was a bit confused when Julie said, "I think you're a really nice guy." "Julie," I replied, "we've known each other our entire lives." "Why are you telling me now?" she asked, punching my shoulder playfully as we ran. "It's great that you're letting Mary go to the senior prom with Jimmy. Otherwise, he's so shy and nerdy he'd never get the chance to go." Jimmy was a nice guy, but definitely shy and nerdy. I suspected he was a neighbor of Mary's, and she always watched out for him. I wasn't surprised that Mary agreed to go. I was a little bummed out that she didn't have the decency to tell me by Friday afternoon. 6 other people had complimented me on my maturity, and they thought it was great that my steady girlfriend could be escorted to the prom by her friend and neighbor. To be honest, I didn't feel mature. I was a little upset that Mary didn't have the courage to tell me about the senior prom. I knew she'd come clean on her normal Friday. On the night date, she didn't have a choice at the last minute. On Friday afternoon, I texted her and canceled. I got so many texts and voicemails from her, asking me to call her. I finally sent Mary a text. "I've known about your prom date since Monday. At least 10 people told me it's too bad you weren't one of them. I want a girlfriend I can trust. That's not you." I turned off my phone. Mary and I didn't get back together until the start of the next school year. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was heading to my car in the student parking lot. Mary was sitting on the hood of my car as I approached. She wanted to know if she could buy me ice cream at Dairy Queen. That was the start of our exclusive relationship for the next 2 years. During the second year, we had a long-distance relationship. As I went to college in New York City. I was able to come home often, and I was thrilled to exchange virginities on a March Saturday night shortly after her 18th birthday. Mary and I ate until she left for college the following year. 2 weeks into her freshman year, I received a Dear John email. It seemed that she was having too much fun I went to college and, bless my heart, I just wasn't ready to be tied down to a full-time boyfriend. Time passed, and I didn't call or write to my boyfriend. I was popular, got very good grades, and was a Division III tennis player. I replaced Mary with a steady stream of girls, starting the next night. I didn't see Mary again until 2 years after she graduated from college. I was working as a staff engineer for a local defense contractor and was out with some work associates. After a long week, I literally bumped into her at the bar. We chatted for a few minutes before we each went back to our friends. I'll admit that I kept an eye on her for the next hour, trying to decide if I should follow her to the parking lot. When her friends started to leave, I couldn't help but laugh. After they left, she walked to the bar, sat on a stool, and when her drink came, she swiveled her chair until it faced me and stared at our table. I watched her with a little grin as a stream of guys approached her, only to be quickly rebuffed. It wasn't until she looked me directly in the eye and held up 2 fingers that I excused myself from my friends. I needed to wait for Mary to tell another guy to get I was lost before I even stood next to her. I asked Mary, smiled, and said, "Yep, if you had let 2 more guys ask me out, I was going to accept his invitation." Mary and I dated for almost 6 months before we became exclusive and moved in together. We were married 10 months later, and we lived a happy and fulfilling life for almost 5 years. My day started early. I had a 7, oh my, it's already 3 a.m. Good morning. I met with a dear friend and longtime customer at the Marriott in New Haven, Connecticut. It's a lovely hotel, but I think the university there could be a bit more impressive. Tony was already waiting for me in the conference room. We chatted for a few minutes while I set up my laptop, laid out all the paperwork, and filled the mug with steaming hot black coffee. Tony is a civilian contractor working on the United States Navy's next-generation submarine propulsion system. I'm a mechanical engineer at a defense contractor that specializes in marine mechanics. We've had the pleasure of working together on 3 small but important contracts over the last few years. For some reason, we were each getting pushback from our immediate superiors on our current negotiations. We were told that we had one more chance to solve the 7 critical issues remaining before others in our respective companies would take over the negotiations. Tony and I worked straight through lunch and finally took a deep breath at 2. It's 15 p.m. Do you think your company will accept at this time?" Tony asked. I gave a little shrug and told him honestly, I can't understand why our last 2 proposals weren't accepted. Tony wondered, "You and I have gotten close over the last few years. Do you think it might be a test to see if we're too close?" I gave a little chuckle and admitted, I felt the same. "I think I'll have a drink," Tony said. "I'm tired," I replied, stretching and shrugging. "How about you?" "I'm going to have a drink," Tony said. "I'm tired too. I've got over 30 pages of notes that I've got to figure out," I said. "A drink won't make it any easier." "I'm going to have a drink," Tony said. "I'm going to hang out and transcribe the important resolutions into my laptop. I'll email you a memo of understanding by 9 o'clock. 12 a.m. tomorrow morning. Let's get on the phone right away if there are any misunderstandings. I need to submit my report by noon tomorrow," Tony said as he started to pack up his computer. I walked Tony through the hotel lobby, and after he left, I stopped into the gift shop and bought a Diet Coke before returning to the conference room. As soon as I entered the room, I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I decided to change the location, packing my bag and relocating to a quiet corner. I checked in with the office from the hotel lobby and found out that a little hiccup had popped up over the morning. I'd texted my wife and suggested she have dinner without me, and it seems there was a misunderstanding. No big deal. I settled into a comfy lobby chair and got to work. The change in location really helped, and I was able to get so much done over the next couple of hours. I was so focused that I'm still surprised that her laugh caught my attention. I looked up and recognized Jenny, my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law was walking across the hotel lobby wearing a traditional little black dress and sexy heels. She was headed straight to the check-in area. If that wasn't strange enough, her arm was wrapped through the arm of a tall, good-looking man. Looking at the man, I realized he wasn't Jenny's husband Scott. Without thinking, I turned on the camera app on my phone and took several pictures of the couple as they checked in. One picture made me feel a bit sad as the man's hand dropped and gave her a nice squeeze. I took another set of pictures as they walked to the elevator. As they entered the elevator, I took a few more pictures of them kissing goodbye. I quickly walked over and watched as the indicator light showed that they got off on the 8th floor. I was feeling a little angry and confused. I loved Jenny, and I counted her husband as my best friend. I'll admit I was a bit out of sorts. As I sat back in my seat, my brain was fried from the day-long intense negotiations and the shock of seeing Jenny with another man. I didn't notice the man sit in the chair next to me until he reached out his open hand and said, "I'm James, and I'm the general manager of the Marriott." We shook hands, and he said, "I'm so sorry for the confusion. I didn't mean to startle you." "Hi James, I'm Chris Harrington. I rented conference room L22 today, James." "Oh, you rented that room? I saw you taking pictures of the couple who just checked in. Do you know them?" My dear friend, I was quite taken aback. I told James, "Mr. Harrington, if I may be frank," he asked after I nodded. He continued, "I'm concerned that there might be some trouble if you stay here. I've never gotten into the kind of trouble you're talking about. I've never come close to it, but there is likely to be." James and I had a bit of a confrontation, but I was able to walk away before we disturbed your guests. James looked around the lobby, and it was fairly quiet. No one seemed to be paying any attention to us. He handed me a folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it, and I found a man's name and address printed on it. James asked, "Do you think we can avoid any further confrontation now that you have that information?" I reached out my hand, and as we shook, I said, "I can almost guarantee it." I went back to work and was able to complete a surprising amount, given that I looked up at the elevator bank every few seconds when Jenny and her guy exited the elevator. It was nearly 3 hours later. My bag was packed, and I was on my feet, walking toward them before they took 2 steps into the lobby. I was holding my cell phone to my face and snapping pictures as I approached the pair. Jenny was confused at first, but I lowered the camera, and her jaw dropped open and she visibly turned pale. "I'd give you a kiss like I normally do, but I don't want to taste your boyfriend on your lips." "Chris, what a surprise! I'm here for meetings, but I didn't expect to see you here." I could see Jenny willing herself to calm down. She took a moment to calm down and said, "Chris, I'd like you to meet Mike Charmet. Mike and I work together, and we're here to check out some meeting rooms for an upcoming event that our agency is hosting." I looked at Mike as he stretched out his hand toward me. "It's nice to meet you, Chris," he said. I ignored his hand and asked Mike, "Mike, I'd love to ask you a question." Jenny and Mike exchanged a few looks that seemed a little strained before I asked, "Mike, do you think Jenny is more attractive when she's dressed like this?" I waved my hand, indicating how Jenny was currently dressed or the hot black dress she had on when you went to the 3rd floor to inspect meeting rooms 3 hours ago. Before they could think of a response, I looked down at Mike's left hand and noticed a nice wedding band. "Mike, I can see that you're as much of a lying, cheating, garbage person as my precious sister-in-law." Mike lost his cool at that point. He hissed, "Listen, buddy, you don't have a clue what's going on. Just mind your own business, and I won't kick your butt. I'm sorry to tell you, Mike, but my sister-in-law is cheating with a wordless a dash. I'm sorry, Mike, but I think you're the one who needs to mind his own business." I slowly put both arms behind my back and continued as far as kicking my butt. "I'll give you a free first shot. You better make it good because after you take your shot, I'm going to give you a good pounding, put you in the hospital, and then call the cops and file charges against you." I shut up and smiled. Mike jerked his head toward Jenny and angrily said, "Can you handle this, Mike?" I need to go without waiting for an answer. He turned toward the hotel's front door, and stone off. I couldn't help but say it as Mike walked toward the hotel's front door. If I were you, I'd give your wife a heads up. I'll be calling. Mike stopped and slowly turned, directing his gaze at Jenny. He reiterated, "Please take care of this, Jenny." After watching Mike exit the hotel, Jenny turned, put her hand on my arm, and said, "Chris, can we go into the bar and have a drink?" I was tempted, but quickly decided against it. "I'm sorry, Jenny. I've wasted a number of hours waiting for you to finish your sex party." Jenny cringed as I continued, "I really need to get home, have a drink, and decide how to handle telling Scott and Mike's wife." Jenny squeezed my arm and pleaded, "I only do this when Scott's away. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not hurting Scott. How long have you known me?" She didn't answer, but looked deeply into my eyes. "I guess it's at least a few years since I first dated Mary in high school. Does that sound about right?" After letting the silence build, I angrily told her, "Jenny, in all that time, what made you think I wouldn't tell my best friend his wife is a lying, cheating woman?" As I turned toward the exit, I caught the gaze of James, the hotel manager. He gave me a thankful nod as I pushed my way through the revolving door. The rush hour traffic was gone as I started the half-hour drive north on a 91 toward home. I was able to set the cruise control to 78 miles per hour and turn up the volume on the country music station. The only annoyance during the on my drive home, I got a lot of calls from my wife. She seemed to be trying to reach me, so I pulled into our garage and closed the door behind me. As I got out of the car, I heard her voice. She was standing in the open doorway between our garage and the condo kitchen. "Where have you been?" she wanted to know. I slid by her and walked into the kitchen. I dumped my work gear on the countertop and noticed Mary's cell phone sitting on the kitchen table next to mine. I poured myself a glass of wine and picked up her phone. I used the keypad to type in her password and opened her text messages. I saw that the text I sent many hours ago had been read. I said, "You read the message." "That's not what I meant," she replied. "I know," I said, heading to the den to pour a couple of fingers of bourbon. "Then tell me what you mean," she called after me. I came back to the kitchen and found Mary sitting at the table. "What did you do to upset me?" she asked. "Jenny, as far as I know, I haven't done anything to upset Jenny. Jenny, on the other hand, has upset me greatly." I watched Mary gather her thoughts as I sat across from her. "Did you know Jenny is cheating on Scott?" My direct question caught her off guard. She said it was only once, but I knew that wasn't true. I told Mary. Jenny told me she only cheats when Scott is on the road. After a short pause, I continued, "I noticed you didn't answer my question. Did you know that your sister cheats on Scott?" Mary sighed. I took a sip of wine and said, "Chris, this is between Scott and Jenny." Mary smiled and told me that was the first thing she'd said I agreed with. "If it's between Scott and Jenny, my problem is that Scott doesn't know there's a problem that needs to be addressed." "Oh, my God!" "This is none of your business," Mary said, getting upset. "I want you to keep your mouth shut," she said. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on the kitchen table. After folding my fingers together in a prayer, I said, "I'm sorry, Mary. I didn't mean to upset you." Like fashion, I said, "You know me, Mary. You know me better than anyone." Mary expected more and was startled when I got up and quickly walked to the kitchen archway. I hesitated for a moment before turning. "I've asked you twice if you've known about Jenny cheating, and you've refused. I'll ask again, how long have you known Jenny?" "She's always been a little wild." Mary responded, 3 years. My immediate reply was, "What the hell does that mean?" Mary asked, "It simply means that you refuse to answer a question that I think is critically important to our marriage." Mary said confidently. Well, let's see. Mary, I want to be clear that my relationship with your sister will never be the same now that I know she's not always honest with me. I'll always remember that, and I'm sure you will too. I'm also wondering if you approve of her behavior. I'm not trying to be unfair, Chris. I know you don't travel nearly as much as Scott, but I'd still like to know your thoughts. As much as Scott, I'm on the road for one trip each month for the first time in a relationship, and I have to wonder if you've cheated on me, Mary. Her eyes widened, and she exploded. How dare you accuse me of cheating, she said. I immediately jumped in and responded with as much intensity as I could muster. I've never accused you of cheating, but your cavalier attitude toward your sister screwing around has me wondering if you have. I stopped and looked at my wife with a little smile before continuing. You and I both know you can't prove that you haven't cheated. All I have is my trust in you, and right now, the trust is a little shaken. I turned and walked down the hall to my home office after doing an internet search on Mike Charmet, confirming he was married and having both his home and office addresses. I decided to tackle the last awful chore. I texted my brother Scott, my in-law. I'm so excited to see you on Friday. I'm hoping you'll be home around 2 o'clock. It took about 10 minutes before you responded with a resounding yes. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. It's 30 minutes until we're meeting up, right? Hi, Mary here. Hey, let's meet up at the pit stop. I'll be there at 4. Oh, I hope this has nothing to do with Jenny's frantic phone call. PA was wondering if we had a chance to chat. I was trying to decide how to respond when my phone rang. I answered, "Hi Scott," while swiveling my chair to face the wall. I wasn't going to hide my words from Mary, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her to hear this conversation through the closed and locked door. What's going on, Chris? It's about as bad as it gets. Scott, are you sure you want to? Scott asked, is she cheating on me? I answered, yes. The silence lasted several minutes, only broken up by an occasional so. I'll see you at the pit, he said. The call was immediately terminated. I was going to text Scott and let him know I was available to talk anytime he wanted. But I finally decided to leave him alone. I was confident that he knew I had his back and was available to him any time he needed. While I was talking to Scott, my wife had quieted down. I'm sure she was trying to listen. After hanging up, I heard her say through the closed door, "Please come to the kitchen. We need to talk." I was actually considering going to our guest bedroom, but decided to finish the bourbon sitting on the kitchen table. After easing myself into a kitchen chair across from Mary, I took a nice gulp of Knob Creek and relished the slight burnt taste in my throat. I glanced over at my wife and could see her thinking really hard about what to say next. My brain was tired. I didn't have much fight left in me, and I knew that the last bit of booze wouldn't help. I was waiting for Mary to start when my phone began buzzing in my pocket. Oh my goodness! I got really upset. When will this day end? I dug the phone out, looked at the screen, and saw a number I didn't recognize, which only added to my. I was feeling pretty frustrated, so I answered the phone with a bit of an aggressive hello. A female voice responded, "I'm sorry to be calling so late. My name is Colleen Charmat, and someone from this number called my house twice earlier this evening. Oh, and her name is Jennifer Palmer, and I think they work together." There was a long pause before she responded. This is the third time I've received a similar call, and it will be the last. How does a man do this to a wife and 4 children? I knew the question was rhetorical, so instead I offered, I have pictures of them checking in together at the downtown New Haven Marriott, kissing in the elevator as the door closes and returning to the lobby almost 3 hours later. Marriage is a lie, his wife said sadly. All 4 of my children believe they're in a monogamous marriage and have a happy family. I was shocked to hear this as the 3rd time she's caught him cheating. I'm going to divorce him. Mary was stunned as she stared at me. I twirled the last of I took a little sip of bourbon and swirled it around in the glass before taking the last mouthful and rinsing the glass in the sink. I went up to our bedroom and lay in bed, thinking about everything that had happened to my extended family over the last few hours. I realized that I wasn't to blame for all the sadness and destruction, as usual. My alarm went off at 5. Oh my, it's already 12 a.m. Instead of starting the day with a workout in our basement gym, I got ready for work, showered, and headed out the door. I wasn't trying to get away from Mary. I needed to get into the office and complete the memo of understanding and get it off to Tony. Thursday was a busy day. Tony and I needed to speak on the phone for 45 minutes to get the wording exactly right on a couple of points, but I was easily able to get the completed agreement to my boss by the noon deadline. I spent the afternoon catching up with emails from the previous day and was heading home at 5 p.m. My normal quitting time. I had been wondering what the evening would bring and was only half surprised when I turned onto our street and saw Jenny's car and her parents' car parked in front of my home. Oh dear, it's going to be a long night, I groaned as I pressed the button to open the garage door. What did you say to Scott? Jenny asked, her voice full of concern, as I closed the door behind me. I gave my poor wife a look that said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart," and said, "I'm going to change. I'll be back in a few minutes. If I'm forced to leave my house, I'll have to physically throw everyone out the front door, including you, Mary." I didn't wait for a reply and quickly made my way down the hall to her bedroom. After contemplating the coward's way out and climbing out the bedroom window, I decided to face Mary and her family. It was difficult walking by my open bottle of bourbon, but I thought it was best to have a clear head. My second thought was, screw it, and I returned to the bar. 1 wasn't enough, and 2 was over my limit for polite conversation, so I settled for an inch. I was so happy to see everyone when I came back into the kitchen. They were all sitting around the table, and there was an empty seat between Mary and her father, Steve. Instead of sitting, I leaned against the kitchen counter and watched the group. I wet my lips with my drink and smiled. I like my in-laws, they're good, solid people. Steve is my father-in-law, and I respect him a great deal. Scott was a man I respected. He was straightforward, honest, and you always knew what he thought of you. If you remained on his good side, you couldn't have a better friend in the world. On the other hand, if you crossed him, I was confident he could make your life miserable. Steve considered Scott and me his friends. My mother-in-law thought of herself as a wheeler-dealer and businesswoman extraordinaire. She owned and operated a well-known local real estate franchise with an outstanding reputation. Betty oversaw the day-to-day operations. Steve was the brains behind the company's success, and everyone knew it. "Wouldn't you be more comfortable sitting here?" Mary patted the chair next to her. "I've been sitting all day." "I'm good where I am," I replied. Jenny had her emotions a bit more under control. She asked, "What did you tell Scott?" I thought for a second before responding. I texted him and asked to meet when he got home tomorrow. I told him it was urgent. After gathering my thoughts, Scott called and wanted to know what was wrong. After I confirmed that he wanted to talk over the phone, I told him that I thought he was cheating on him. He cried for a few minutes before he was able to confirm that he'd meet me. And the lawyer interjected and said that's up for debate. Before I could comment, Jenny asked, "Are you going to meet Scott tomorrow?" "I am," I replied. "What are you going to tell him?" "I don't have much more to tell him," I answered. "I sent him the pictures I took and told him you were with Mike for just under 3 hours. I sent him Mike's name and address along with his wife's contact information. I guess that I'm going to be. I could really use some support and a shoulder to cry on." "What about me, Chris?" Jenny wanted to know, don't I deserve support too? I actually cracked a smile as I looked around the table. "It looks to me like you have plenty of support, Jenny." "I'll stick with Scott on this one." "How do you know that Scott doesn't cheat on Jenny while he's traveling?" "It's common for married men to stray when they're away from home," commented Betty, the girl's mother. I can't, though. I have to say, I really don't know how Scott behaves when he's away. In fact, I was so surprised when I heard that Jenny might be cheating on me. I never thought she would do such a thing. The table was in an uproar, with people saying things like, "How dare you?" and "That's just uncalled for." Mary was really taken aback by my statement, so I quickly added, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I just want to be honest." I told her that I had noticed her dismissive attitude towards Jenny, and I was sorry if I had offended her. "Steve, I'm really worried about cheating. Mary's dad told me she's never cheated on you. I can't believe you think that of her." I knew I had to be careful with my next few words. I didn't want to turn Steve against me. I purposely lowered the volume and harshness of my voice. I looked Steve in the eye and challenged him to prove it. After a few moments of silence, I continued, "Steve, you can't prove that Mary hasn't cheated." I held up my hand when the protest started. "All I have is 6 years of absolute trust in Mary. I told her last night that my trust in her is shaken. I'm sorry, Chris, but I think it's not fair." Mary said I jumped in before Mary could finish. "I asked you 3 times last night if you knew Jenny was cheating on Scott. You refused to answer my question. Instead, you changed the subject. You didn't lie, but you were a little dishonest." "I'm sorry," Mary admitted she's known. "I haven't supported her about Jenny's affairs, but I didn't want to cause a mess like this." She waved her hands, indicating our current problems. I really hoped that her affairs would run their course and Scott wouldn't find out. I was nodding, although I was greatly disappointed that Mary hid her sister's infidelity. I could understand protecting her sister. "Do you remember the talk we had about being exclusive a few weeks before you proposed?" Mary asked when I nodded. She looked directly into my eyes and said, "I promise I haven't had a romantic or intimate relationship since our talk. In fact, I haven't been with another man since we started dating after college." I could see the angel, and I'll admit I was a bit naive, but I could see it. I married 5 years earlier as she spoke those words, "I love you and I believe you." I told my brother, Ride. Her family was kind enough to let a few moments pass before we continued our conversation. I could tell that Steve was really happy with how things were going. Betty asked, "What are you going to do about Scott?" I said, "I'm just going to support my best friend, just like each of you will support Jenny. Scott deserves my support, and I'm going to give it to him." The following 6 weeks were a bit of a grind. Scott moved out of his house and into a nearby apartment. He immediately filed for an official separation from Jenny. "I know you were thinking about filing for divorce, but I'm so happy you didn't." I had dinner with Scott every Wednesday while Mary kept the same schedule with her sister. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was having lunch with a couple of work buddies at Clyde's Barbecue and Bar. We were sitting at a table for 4 when a man pulled out the empty chair and sat down across from me. "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you were coming." "Hey there." It took me a moment to place the face, but when I did, I couldn't help but laugh. "Mike! I heard Colleen broke it off with you. How are you holding up?" He gave me a look that said he didn't appreciate my concern. "Oh, come on, Mike. It's not my fault you're an absentee dad." I shot a glance at my friends, Carl and Joe, who were trying to hide their smiles. "Oh, Mike, you know I'm just joking around. I'm sorry if you took it the wrong way." "Oh," Mike laughed and admitted, "I guess it was partly my fault too, but there are so many married women around that it's impossible for me to stay faithful." I started to feel a little uneasy about Mike's response when he continued, "It seems I'm a sex addict and my kink is married women. I like hooking them up with my friends." Mike nudged Carl on his right. "That's what I did with Jenny, his sister. And I turned her into my personal sex doll and shared her with my friends." He winked and added that she was really popular. "We used her for over a year. She loved every second with me and my friends." I was about ready to dump her when I ran into her and her sexy younger sister at a happy hour. His smirk left little doubt. About the rest of the conversation, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the table next to my plate. It was the type of envelope that held pictures. Mike's smirk told me everything I needed to know about the contents. I'll admit that my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I would be damned if I'd let the "I'm not going to let you get to me, Mike." I picked up the envelope and put it in my sports coat pocket. Mike was trying to provoke me. He asked, "Aren't you going to show your friends? I bet they'd love to see the pictures and videos of your wife and her sister having sex with my boys. I've been turning her out for over 5 months. She's as wild and horny as Jenny is. But your wife is 10 times wilder." Mike laughed. "I have a video of her on her niece. She's pleading for us to have sex with her. She loves being used like a sex doll." "Oh, come on, don't you have anything to say?" I was gritting my teeth but needed to respond. "You've got to be the sweetest, most innocent guy on the planet." His smirk was still ear to ear when I told him that when I give Jenny's husband Scott those pictures, he's going to file for divorce since you're Jenny's direct supervisor. "Oh, my friend, how long do you think it'll take for him to sue you and your company? You'll be out of work in a week." It was hard, but I started laughing. The poor guy knew he had underestimated me and was considering his next move when I said, "Did you know I grew up in this town?" "What do I care about where you grew up?" The a-hole replied. The I could see that the guy was in for a world of hurt, but I'd take my time. "I know all the movers and shakers in town." Mike didn't look very impressed, so I continued. "I also know the meanest pieces of crap. I'd like to suggest that you leave town while your legs still work. I'm sorry, but I'm not scared of you. I've got witnesses that you threatened," he said, indicating Carl and Joe. They both laughed, and Joe said he really is an idiot. "You're getting divorced and losing your kids. You're going to be fired from your job while paying alimony and child support. Best of all, I'd advise you to be looking over your shoulder soon. One day, you're going to end up in a world of hurt." Mike smiled and pushed his chair back. He stood and said, "Goodbye." Mike was right. I'm nothing but with a scum-sucking wife. My mind was whirling out of control as Mike walked away. Later, back in my office, I did look at the pictures and confirmed the most grotesque details imaginable for a happily married man. There were explicit photos of Mary with 6 different men in a couple. In the pictures, she was surrounded by 3 men and a woman. In a second grouping of pictures, Jenny was doing many of the same acts. The video was even worse and really upset me. Mary and Jenny loved being the center of a series of rather unpleasant orgies. I'll never forget the cries of "Screw you harder." After taking a moment to collect my thoughts and push aside the overwhelming sadness and anger, I called Scott and asked him to meet me for dinner. After another 15 minutes of staring off into space, I invited a second person to join Scott and me. I was still a bit emotional as I sat at my desk and continued to outline why I had to get away. I knew it would be impossible for me to act normal around Mary, so I made plans to travel almost once a month for my company. Half of my trips were planned in advance, and the other trips were urgent and last minute. I texted Mary to tell her that the Whitaker account is in trouble. "I'm on my way to the airport, Scott." That night, I had a quiet dinner after ordering beers. I handed Scott the small stack of pictures that Mike had given me earlier in the day. Scott was just as devastated for himself as he was for me. We agreed that divorce was the best option for us and discussed the possibility of suing the insurance agency that employed Jenny and Mike. In the end, we decided to follow the advice of our divorce attorney. We'd been sitting at our table for well over an hour when I saw Mel enter the bar. He scanned the room, spotted me, and headed in our direction. He stopped to shake hands and exchange a few words. We chatted with folks at different tables. He's a generation older than Scott and me. His daughter Trish went through our school system years ago. He owned a large automobile salvage yard just outside of town 15 years earlier. When I was 16 years old, I was practicing my serve at the high school tennis courts. Summer afternoon, Trish gave me a wave as she rode her bike past the courts. A few minutes later, I was gathering up the balls scattered around the court when I looked up and saw 5 classmates forcefully pushing Trish under the baseball field bleachers, about 100 yards away. I had a pretty good idea of what was going on. We were all thinking the same thing, and I knew Trish wasn't that kind of girl. I ran from the courts and reached the bleachers a few seconds later. Trish's t-shirt had been pulled off, and she was screaming, crying, and trying to cover herself as they tugged at her shorts. Stan Malloy turned just in time for the rim of my racket to connect with his nose. It exploded, blood splashing in every direction, and Stan let out a blood-curdling scream as he dropped to the ground. My backhand connected solidly. Oh, Joey Burns was such a sweetheart. He got knocked out, poor guy. I don't remember much after that, just the 3 of us remaining. Oh my! Those guys tackled me and stomped the living daylights out of me while I was down after they got their last few kicks in. They got scared and hightailed it away. Poor Trish continued to cry as I tried to get my bearings. We left Trish's bike at the field, and she helped me to my car. I was barely able to. I was still a bit woozy, but I managed to pull up to the front of Trish's house. My car hadn't fully stopped before Trish jumped from the front seat and ran, crying, into her home. I had to get out of the car and circle it to close the door. Trish had left it open as I closed the door, and I heard a crash and turned toward the house. A big, strong man was running toward me. His face looked like he was ready to kill someone. It wasn't until he was close that he noticed the damage to my face and my hunched-over posture. "You're Harrington's kid," he growled at me. I was barely able to nod. I told him I think I need an ambulance. "Mr. Ma," I slumped. I slowly lowered myself to the ground, leaning against the car. Mr. Mel turned and yelled toward the house, "Call an ambulance." "Do it now!" Mr. Mel kneeled next to me and took my chin in his hand, turning my head until we locked eyes. "Oh, my goodness," he said. "What happened to my daughter?" "Holes pulled her under the baseball field bleachers." I groaned. "Was it you?" "I'm sorry, I don't remember," he replied. "I was practicing at the tennis court next to the field," I explained. Each word was painful, I said, shaking my head. There was fire in his eyes as he asked, "What did those awful, awful people?" I got there just in time to see them pulling her shirt off. They were trying to get her pants off, but she was still wearing her bra and shorts. If I wasn't in so much pain, I'm sure his icy stare would have scared the living daylights out of me. I'd really love to know who they were. Stan Malloy and Joey Burns will be at the hospital when I get there. I gave them a real talking to with my racket. I told them the other 3 names as an ambulance and police car pulled up behind my car. Mr. Mel leaned in until we were nose to nose. I could smell the garlic. In a soft, conspiratorial whisper, he said, "If you ever need a favor, come and see Sala." When Mel got to our table, he sat down without any formal introductions. I handed him the envelope of pictures and waited a moment until he skimmed through them. When he looked up at me, I said, "There's a man named Michael Charmat. He's a top guy at Jimmy Sullivan's insurance agency. His hobby is trapping married women for his own pleasure and later sharing them with his friends." I then showed him the pictures I had taken of him and his gang with my wife and my brother. Mel nodded his understanding while I continued, "I'm really hoping that someday soon he won't be as handsome, his walk will be much less athletic, and he'll have trouble getting an erection." The 3 of us sat quietly for a number of minutes before Mel uttered his only, "I think it would be a great idea for you both to join a gym. You could even go from work directly to the gym every single night if you wanted to. You could work out together for a few hours and then go out and have a nice dinner afterwards." He looked carefully at our confused faces before finishing. We all looked at each other, not sure what to make of it. Did he think we could have airtight alibis each night? When he finally knew that we understood what he was saying, he rolled his eyes, nodded to me, got up, and slowly walked out of the bar. I didn't go home as I had told Mary the first was out of town. Instead, I checked into a nearby hotel. I went to a nearby Marriott for the night. I was able to talk directly to my boss and gave him an abbreviated version of my troubles. He was really understanding and agreed to let me work remotely and email my team to tell them I was traveling into the following week. The hotel room called me. I slumped into the chair, closed my eyes, and thought through the previous number of weeks. It was obvious to me that because of the hard line I took with her sister, Mary, she could not divulge her affair with Mike and his friends. She knew with absolute certainty that I'd divorce her. Mary was right, but as I thought through the divorce equation, I hoped that would have been fair if she had been honest and forthright instead. Unfortunately, Mary continued to lie to me. I had to find out about her treachery in a public setting, surrounded by my friends and work. My dear colleagues, I can't imagine a scenario that would be more disrespectful and humiliating than sitting in front of your wife's pimp. In discovering she is into orgies, she had been unfair to me in the extreme. As a result, our divorce wouldn't be fair. Instead, I knew I had to crush Mary. I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to make things right. I couldn't let her treat me like this. I knew I had to be strong and get through this together. I got up from the chair, walked over to the desk in the corner of the room, and started making plans. It took me until nearly 1 a.m. to get everything ready. 30 a.m. I needed to map out my plan for my dear wife, who I knew was lying to me and cheating on me. If my plan didn't work out, I knew her heart would be crushed. But if things went as I thought they might, she would be left shattered and in a heap on the curb the next morning. Despite the attorney's recommendation, I didn't start dividing our finances yet. I moved to an extended stay hotel and set up a remote office. I ignored phone calls and texts from Mary until Friday. At that point, I simply messaged her that I would be away for the weekend. Her response was beyond upset, and she called all weekend begging me to call her back. Over the weekend, I was able to purchase everything I needed for my plan. After my checklist was complete, I headed to the mountains for a long hike on Sunday. When I returned to the hotel, I turned on my phone and saw texts and calls from Mary. Each of her family members and a few work associates had reached out. It seemed like Mary was extremely. I was really bummed that I was off the grid and trying to track me down on Monday and Tuesday. I worked from my hotel room. I tried to tie up all loose ends, since I'd be out of the office the following day. Wednesday was the day I checked out of the hotel after breakfast and headed home. On the way, I drove through the parking lot of Mary's employer to make sure her car was at work. I also put a GPS device under her seat. It took a couple of hours to set up the equipment and props at home, and I was done by early afternoon at 2 p.m. I started a fire in our lovely living room fireplace, which Mary and I often enjoyed on a cozy weekend winter night. We'd sip wine, chat, and snuggle as we watched the flames dance in the fireplace. But today wasn't a chilly February day, it was September, and the outdoor temperature was a balmy 84 degrees Fahrenheit in the early afternoon. I waited until 3 p.m. I texted Mary to let her know I'd just arrived home. My phone rang right away, but I let her call go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message, but she did text me a rude comment. I watched the GPS indicator on my laptop, and I had expected Mary to leave work right away, but she didn't. The fire was blazing, and I kept adding logs to the pile at 5:05 p.m. When the GPS indicated that Mary had started her drive home, the temperature in the living room was pretty toasty, easily over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I thought, oh dear, perfect conditions for a heat wave. I gritted my teeth and waited for her to get home. There was a 3 and Mary arrived home a minute after I thought she would. I heard her drop her briefcase by the door and felt her presence as she stood in the entryway to the living room. She walked in and found me sitting on the couch watching the fire. There was a cheese and cracker plate and a bottle of wine on the table in front of the couch. I was holding one glass of wine, and a second glass was at the other end of the table and was for Mary. "What the hell are you doing?" Mary asked, her voice full of curiosity. "The heat is overbearing," she added, her tone light-hearted. I turned from the fire to, "Oh, look at her." I asked what on earth she was doing there. "I've prepared a romantic welcome for my wife." I noticed that 2 beads of sweat were already running down her forehead and cheek. The word romantic caught in her throat and she didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she took a few steps closer to the fire, bent down, and picked up a half-buried item off the stone. She held it up and studied it closely before taking a step back and looking toward the top shelf of the bookcase. I thought she might hurt her back, so I was really happy to see her whirling so quickly to face me, her eyes wide and oh my, she showed me the smoldering front cover of a book. It was the only part of the book that had escaped the flames. It didn't look like Mary was in any shape to form words, so I calmly told her we didn't have any kindling to start the fire, so I used a couple of those old books. I nodded to the empty space on the top shelf where Mary kept a full row of books. "I only used 4 or 5, but we have plenty more to start our next fire." While talking, I had gotten up from the couch, grabbed Mary's glass of wine, and was holding it out to her. I watched as her face morphed, and I could tell she was feeling a little overwhelmed. From confusion to anger on the day Mary was born, her dad gave her a gift, the most popular children's book of the previous year on the first empty page. Her dad wrote Mary a heartwarming love letter that described his hopes and dreams for his daughter. He gave her each year on her birthday. Mary received the same gift, 28 books, each a heartfelt reminder of her dad's love. As I watched her express her frustration, I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. I'm not sure if she intended to slap or punch me, but when her hand hit my face, it stung a bit. Her hand made contact with my left eye, and her fingernails dug in a bit. The poor thing! The skin on my cheek, the contents of the 2 glasses of wine covered the front of my shirt, and her face changed again. As she started to cry, I could see utter confusion. Without saying a word, she turned and ran up the stairs to our second-floor bedroom. I heard the door slam behind her. Even though I was devastated because I knew my marriage was over, I did smile. My plan had worked to perfection. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw that my eye was red and starting to swell. Mary's nails had broken the skin, and a tiny bit of blood trickled down my cheek. "Oh dear! Let's get this over with," I said to myself as I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I heard from the other end. "My name's Chris Harrington, and I need police help with a domestic situation. My wife has physically attacked me." She gave the dispatcher my address, and then she locked herself in her bedroom. "I'll be sitting on the front porch until the police arrive. Do you need medical attention?" I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until the first police car arrived. I knew my call was being recorded, so I was very careful how I answered her questions. It wasn't long after the first patrol car pulled up to the curb that a second one arrived. 3 police officers crossed the grass together. "Thank you for coming, officers," I said. "What's going on?" The older police officer looked at me with concern. "Why did your wife Mary hit you?" he asked. "She's been verbally abusive over the last several months," I replied. "I think she's conflicted. She's been hiding an affair that she doesn't think I know about. In fact, I had planned to have her served with the divorce papers tonight. When we talk to your wife, are we going to find any damage?" That's what he asked next. I've never touched my wife or any other woman in anger. That's the honest answer I gave. "What about guns?" the younger officer asked. "I have several handguns. They're all in a gun safe in my office. My wife doesn't have the combination to the safe." As the 2 younger officers entered my house to talk with Mary, I said to the third, "You'd like to see a video of my wife hitting me," he said, squinting as he tried to make sense of my statement. It took him a few moments to ask, "Have you got proof of the assault?" "I think I have proof," I replied. "I'll show you." I finished and waited for him to follow me. My laptop was on the kitchen counter, so I needed to wake it and find the cloud. I opened the folder in my base storage account, backed up the video for 30 minutes, and found the start of our confrontation. I pressed play and stepped away so the police officer could clearly see the action. He watched until Mary left the room and ran upstairs. Then he asked to watch it again after the second viewing. He keyed the communication device on his shoulder and I heard Mary screaming from upstairs and my heart started pounding. I knew the officer had asked me a question, but I needed him to repeat himself. "Is all the video surveillance in your home?" I didn't want to get into that line of questioning, but I knew I had to answer honestly. "No, the living room." "Is the only room with a camera?" he asked, nodding his head in understanding while scratching his chin. "How long have you had the camera in the living room?" I shrugged my shoulders and admitted it's a fairly recent addition. Our staring contest was broken when Mary screamed, "Chris, what the hell is going on? Please help me." I was about to respond when one of the young officer called out, "Sir, this is a police investigation, so please leave immediately." He was talking to an older man standing in the open front door of my home with just as much authority. The man said, "I'm an official process server, and I'm here to serve Mrs. Mary Harrington." He marched up to Mary as all three officers took a step closer, ready for anything. The man asked, "Are you Mary Harrington?" Mary nodded, and the man held up an envelope. "Mary Harrington, you are served." He continued, "In addition to the divorce petition, there is a restraining order keeping you away from Mr. Christopher Harrington, his home, and his work." Mary was handcuffed, so the man handed the envelope to the officer holding her elbow. The server left, and I turned to Mary. I watched as the panic and confusion drained from her face and were replaced by calm. She looked at me and asked, "How did you find out?" "Mike told me," I replied. The two younger officers escorted Mary to the back seat of the patrol car, and the third officer gave me his business card and asked that I email a copy of the video. I went to the front door and watched the first car pull away with Mary. The older officer had stopped halfway down my front walk. He turned and asked, "I've seen you at the pit stop a few times, haven't I?" "I recognize you." I said, "Yes, sir. I'm the sergeant." The officer told me, "A few years ago, I divorced my wife for cheating. I'm paying alimony, child support, health insurance, and the mortgage on the house. I'm so sorry to hear about your house. I hope you're able to find a way to make it work. Maybe the next time I see you at the pit stop, you'll let me buy you a beer and we can chat about what happened today." I went to work the next day and was able to be somewhat productive as I survived Thursday and Friday. I actually groaned out loud when I arrived home on Friday night and found my father-in-law sitting on my front step after pulling into the garage. I got out of the car and called, "Coming this way, Steve," as he entered. I was pouring 2 extra. We sat at the kitchen table, slowly sipping our drinks for many minutes before he said she was cheating too. I simply nodded. "Is there any hope?" He wanted to know. I took 2 more slow sips before I could calm down enough to be kind and respectful to Steve. It wasn't just one time and it wasn't with just one man. I took another taste and then told Steve the complete truth. It wasn't with just one man at a time. He looked at me with disbelief. Before he could respond, I told him I've seen pictures of videos that make me want to throw up. Steve shrank in his seat and turned white. A tear ran down his cheek. We sat together for a long time, each of us caught up in our own thoughts and memories. Mary and Jenny didn't learn this behavior from their mother or me. He said his intense stare was almost chilling. Several more minutes passed before Steve rose to his feet and circled the table as I stood. He grabbed me in a tight bear hug and sobbed into my shoulder. After letting go, He shuffled to the door with the same gait as a 90. "Oh my, it's been a year." The old man opened the door and looked over his shoulder. "Burning those books was a terrible thing to do," he said with a sad look on his face. I had completely forgotten about the argument I had with Mary. I went into the kitchen and came back out with a small box in a flash. I handed it to Steve. He opened it and looked at me with a shocked expression. "I know you treasure those books," I said. "I would never have destroyed them." He was too shocked to say anything. To finish his thought, I went out to the bookstore and got a copy. I explained, as is my normal morning habit. I sat at the kitchen table that Saturday morning and scanned our local newspaper on my tablet. I couldn't help but smile when I read the Hartford Times local section. It said that West Hartford police are investigating the savage assault on a local man as he left the neighborhood bar in the Elwood section of the city. Michael Charma was attacked in the rear parking lot of Tops at approximately 10. Mike was really hurt, so they took him to the hospital. The police are looking for the guy who did this, and they think they'll catch him pretty soon. It was a beautiful November morning when I saw a red Ford SUV pull up next to me. The driver got out slowly, and I said, "Mike, you look like..." I was in the parking lot in front of Jackson Physical Therapy. Sitting on the open tailgate of my Ford F, I saw a 150 pickup, and a little bird had told me that Mike had a 10:30 appointment. I thought it might be a good idea if you got a handicap tag so you can park in a space closer to the building. You know, like the other folks in wheelchairs. In addition to the damage to his knees and feet, Mike also had a shattered jaw that would be wired closed for at least another month. "Cat got your tongue, old man?" I asked with a smirk. I have to give Mike credit. He hobbled toward me using a cane and stopped 10 feet away. He knew that Scott. The police questioned me, and they later cleared me, but I had a feeling that deep down, he knew we were involved in his beating. Now he knew for sure, and it was written all over his face. I could see the hate in his eyes, and I could tell he was imagining the most awful things. I'm sure he was picturing the most grotesque tortures that would take months to complete. I was sure that Mike and I would meet again at some point in the future. I just didn't want to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, so I arranged this meeting. Mike slowly turned and took his first shuffle when I said, "Mary Marie Charma from Milford, Connecticut." As he turned back, I continued, "Susan Bird from White Plains, New York, and Lori Fitzpatrick from Brockton, Massachusetts." The hate in his eyes turned to confusion. I continued, "If anything happens to me, if I'm in a plane crash, if I drown on vacation, if I fall down a flight of stairs, I've made arrangements for my friends to visit. Your mother and sisters." I noticed a slight tremor in his arm as he held the cane. "My friends will beat their faces, Mike," I said, making sure he was listening carefully. "I'm sorry to say that my friends will kick their crotches just like they kicked yours." I waited a few moments while he digested the information before I finished. "While your mother and sisters are withering in pain, my friends will tell them their beating is your fault." I was surprised when Mike stared me down for several long moments before giving me a quick nod. I wasn't sure whether he was nodding, but I was glad to see he understood. His understanding or calling a truce, he turned and stumbled toward the entrance of the building. I'm so happy to report that it was my last contact with Mike Charma. I did give my divorce lawyer the power of attorney needed to handle all legal issues related to our split. We didn't have kids, we earned roughly the same amount of money, and most importantly, I didn't care about anything. Other than separating myself from Mary, I received a call from my lawyer a few weeks after I had Mary served. She told me we've reached an agreement almost exactly along the terms we discussed. However, Mary won't sign off until she's had the opportunity to talk with you. I mumbled a few expletives and was advised to just do it. I was told to sit down and let her talk. I'd be grateful if we could get it over with. I'll agree to have Mary sign the papers and you approve everything so it's official. I'll meet with her for an hour in a conference room at your office. After she signed the papers, I heard that should work, and sure enough, 3 days later I was sitting in the conference room when June the paralegal knocked on the door, opened it, and told me everything had been signed off. And she signed it, too. She gave a little nod and backed away from the door, leaving Mary standing in the entrance. Mary had obviously put some effort into her dress and makeup, but that didn't matter. She was a knockout, at least to me. Even dressed in a sweatshirt and a ponytail, she circled the table, bent down and kissed my cheek, and then took a seat across from me. "Are you nervous, too?" she asked. "Am I?" she wanted to know. My initial thought was, what a weird way to start, but I gave her question some consideration. I gave a little shrug and admitted, "I'm not nervous. I'm more anxious. I want to get this over with and be able to get on with my life." Tears started running down her cheeks when she told me I was blackmailed. Mike was going to put videos of Jenny on the internet. Her dad. She told me she called me early in the divorce proceedings and told me the same thing. I wasn't surprised it might have started with blackmail. I said, "But I watched the videos. I've seen you orgasm thousands of times, and they were real. You begged for more sex. You begged to be screwed harder. You were begging every second there wasn't something shoved down your throat." I was just a little mad and needed to calm down after a few moments. I continued, "You may have felt coerced, but that isn't any reason to screw up our marriage just because you found out. Jenny was cheap on her husband, but that doesn't mean you needed to turn yourself into one as well, Mary." I was so confused and didn't see any alternative. What could I have done? "You could have and you should have. I know you trusted me, and I'm really sorry I let you down." I was so angry when Mary rolled her eyes. If we'd gone to the police, they might have been able to develop the evidence to do something. But we'll never know. What we do know is that his wife and employer would have found out. We would have had a tiny bit of satisfaction, and we would still be together. I'm really sorry you didn't trust me, but I don't know if you ever did. What kind of trust are you talking about? Mary wanted to know, so I answered her with a question. Do you remember why we broke up the first time? The first time I asked, I meant in high school. Mary looked utterly confused, but I tried to explain. Mary, you wanted to help your neighbor Jimmy and go to his prom with him, right? Me, you've got to be kidding me. Mary, I said, I thought you were a dumb high school kid. Me, I was worried about hurting the feelings of my first serious boyfriend. And a raft on Simpson Lake afterward we promised that we would remain faithful and get married after college. Your promise lasted 10 days, Mary. Angrily asked, are you telling me that you were completely faithful the first year you were in college? I shook my head and ignored her pointless question. My point is whether you agree or not, I question if you ever trusted me. I don't think you did. I think we can all agree that I have every reason to not trust a word that comes out of your mouth at this point. You straight up lie when you're not lying, you are playing word games and hiding the truth, trying to change the direction of the conversation. Mary told me I haven't seen Mike since all the trouble started. When I smirked, Mary asked what Mike had in unfortunate. Oh, Mary, I'm so sorry to hear about your friend. I really hope he's able to recover fully from his accident. What happened, exactly? Well, he's not able to perform at his previous peak level, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, Mary, I'm so sorry to hear that. I really hope he's able to recover fully from his accident. What happened, exactly? Because that's what I paid to have happen, I said, her hands covering her face as she stared at me wide-eyed. Oh, Chris, I'm so scared for you. I met Mike just a few weeks after his accident, and we had the nicest, most civilized chat. I'm almost positive that I convinced them that our association needs to end, Mary said. Her expression changed from fright to love. I'd seen that look countless times over the years. You still love me, don't you? She nearly shouted. I was so surprised by her outburst that I laughed. Mary was obviously frustrated and said, You can't tell me you don't love me. I shrugged and told her, "You're right. I can't say that. I don't love you, and I also can't say that I do love you. What you need to understand is that I'm not willing to put the time and effort into growing any love that's left in me." Mary nearly exploded. "Why would you ever say that? It's simple." I said, looking directly into her eyes, "You aren't worth it." Mary sat back and she was sobbing uncontrollably, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. I could see her breathing through her open mouth. I reached into the folder on the table and took out 3 pictures, one by one. I placed them in front of her. The first picture showed Mary naked with her legs spread wide. The second picture had Mary on her hands and knees, and the third picture had Mary on her knees and smiling. My conclusion is that my future children and I deserve someone better than that vile woman as our mother and wife. Goodbye, Mary. I got up and walked away. A few days later, Mary was sentenced to 50 hours of community service for the domestic violence case. It took another 7 months for me to get the divorce settled. I sold the house and gave Mary a share from the proceeds. I moved to a different town while still keeping my job. I didn't plan to move, but it was the best thing for me at the time. I just kept myself to work. Scott also filed for divorce and is still living in the same town. I get calls from Steve now and then, just to check in. He's a great guy, and I enjoy our chats. Scott and I meet up now and then when he's in town for business. Life hasn't been easy, but we're doing okay.